All right, so you've always wanted to be a businessman since you were young, but then it really turned into you being on TV. Did you ever want to be on TV?
I did want to be on TV at first, but I happened to grow up in Hollis, Queens, where for some reason in Hollis, Queens, this little small area, came majority of the hip hop artists in the 80s and 90s. You know, I would see Run DMC driving on the block, or Salt and Pepper, or LL Cool J. The guys from Onyx would be my barbers, or Ja Rule. We hung out down the block. Waka Flocka lived 3 doors away from me. Wow. Intro, some of the Fat Boys lived there. Tribe Called Quest, anybody and everybody, right? I was on the first major national tour called the Fresh Fest, and I remember being on that tour about 14 years old, just pushing around speakers, and it was like Rakim, Public Enemy, and all these other acts, and I wanted to be, hopefully, one day on TV. I was a break dancer earlier on. I remember auditioned with Houdini. They said they would take me on tour, and I was around 15, 16, and my mother said, hell no, you ain't going on no goddamn tour. Because when I was on tour, I would just go and drive my car when they're in like Troy, New York, or actually, when they were over at the Civic Center here, I would drive my car up and just hang out and then go back home. But so she didn't want me on the actual tour bus on tour. So some kid out of Atlanta I never heard of until 10 years later would take my place on the Houdini tour. His name was Jermaine Dupree. He would end up taking my place on that Houdini tour. I say all that to say that I wanted to be in the public light, but then after knowing all these artists and seeing them out, back then where it wasn't about pictures, they would, LL would be maybe sitting across the table from his wife having a nice private dinner. Maybe they were upset at each other, having an argument. People just get in his face and ask for autographs, and it was uncomfortable to see that. And then I would end up having FUBU and being somewhat in the public light, and I just didn't want to do that. So I had said that maybe, hopefully, one day I could be on TV and be more like, a newscaster, a Walter Cronkite or something like that, because, you don't see people walking up to newscasters going crazy, right? But the newscasters, depends on what kind of news you watch, they're giving potentially, hopefully, vital information to make you a little smarter, and I wanted to be that. So I took the job on Shark Tank, and I became that, but I never thought the Shark Tank would be a pop sensation, or, like that. I just thought it was going to be kind of like 60 Minutes. Yeah. So
in the beginning, I heard that you didn't believe in Shark Tank at all. You're like, this is stupidest idea in the world.
Yeah, because, listen, if somebody tells you, all right, you sell solar. If somebody said to you, hey, we're just going to record you trying to sell solar all day, I'm not sure how exciting it could be. I'm sure there's obviously challenges, but maybe I was too close to it. I'd be like, that shit ain't gonna work.
LL Cool J was on a Gap commercial, and he was wearing all FUBU. Yeah. And I think they spent like $30 million on the commercial. Then they took it down because FUBU went like crazy. Everyone was coming to Gap to try and buy FUBU. Was there a story with that?
So basically, this is why we kind of talk about the lack of diversity and inclusion in companies. The Gap wanted to get into the hip hop market. They hired LL Cool J. He felt a little offended at the way they kind of addressed him. Very much like, just come on in and do whatever that rap shit is.
No respect.
No respect, right? And so he put in the commercial. He wore a FUBU hat. He said, listen, I got a funny shaped head. I got a custom hat. He wore the FUBU hat. And then he said in the commercial, for us, by us on the low. Yep. The Gap spent $30 million there in that commercial. The commercial aired for about 5 weeks. And because they didn't have anybody, whether African-American or whether white or black or yellow, whatever the case is in the company that really believed or understood hip-hop culture, there was nobody in there to say, oh, by the way. And remember, social media wasn't out now, so there was no hashtag of Gap fail. There was no way to understand what was going on.
They couldn't pick up on what was happening.
They didn't pick up on what was happening. So 5 weeks later, it took them 5 weeks for somebody to finally say, you idiots.
That's incredible.
Yeah, so they fired everybody from the Gap. They hired a multicultural agency that they didn't have to do any analytics. They went back and was like, well, before you try to spin doctor this, clean it up, guess what? Everybody in the hood is going to the Gap looking for FUBU, and they can't find FUBU, and guess what they're buying? So the Gap spent another $60 million re-airing the ad, realizing that they could either take advantage of it or have egg on their face.
It turned into a movement. How many other companies, from your experience, because you probably watch it happen in real time, followed suit and were like, oh, wow, these guys are, breaking into this culture that we were so blind to?
Great question. A lot. Prior to that, I didn't create the urban market at all. I got inspired by a couple of companies, Carl Kanai, Cross Colors, Walkaware, and a couple of companies before that. But FUBU took it to another level. And then after like the Gap ad and various other things, then everybody started coming out with brands that address that market.